Next speaker, McLean Roth of Telnix, we have his badge, but we don't have him. So maybe he is delayed. If so, we'll pick up at the end of the track. But fortunately, with us right now, and for the live streaming audience, I hope you can adapt to this. We have Noah Rafalco, who is the Chief Enterprise Officer of Midori Interactive. He's also a founder and CEO of TSG Global, which provides voice and messaging services for telecom carriers. Noah founded Midori Interactive in 2017. He has an extensive bio on the website, so since you're more interested in hearing what Noah has to say than me talking about Noah, I invite him up. Please welcome Noah.
Okay. And do we have the slides somewhere? And while we pull that up, it just doesn't stop at the companies that you heard of. I also, I'm here to speak on something I was dragged into by my friends. And my friends are probably some of the biggest companies with the biggest names you've heard in technology that are global multi-billion-dollar companies. And one of those people came from one of our founders in MessageComm came from a company you might remember, a company named Vonage. We were around a long time ago disrupting telecommunications with this new kind of technology called voice over IP. So I'll talk about me just for a second, and then what I'll do is I'll lead right into the examples that I'm going to show you, because we're going to touch on a lot. We're going to touch on why you need to understand technology before you design. Don't design in the dark is something that I've learned over the decades. But again, my name is Noah Rafalco. I've been an advanced communications specialist for well over 20 years. And what that means is it means that I'm that poor guy standing in the middle of Times Square on a crate screaming about the future, and nobody's listening. So as I screamed about voice over IP and how it was going to change the world, no one listened. Jeff Pulver listened. And he eventually formed that little company called Vonage. Others come into the space and don't know anything about Jeff now. To me, he's one of my mentors. So being on the edge of telecommunications and deployment means that whatever you end up using, I've been touching for about 8 to 10 years, screaming from that crate. And what I've learned is that through the years, you have to understand the ecosystem prior to getting into deployment or full production design. And a great example is some of these TADHack winners. I was sitting here listening to these TADHack winners, and they have fantastic ideas. And I'll tell you, most of them would fail. And it's not because of their ideas. It's because they don't understand the ecosystem that they're trying to ride on. In this sense, messaging. I was one of the first companies in 2007. Now, think about this. 2007, we could first text enable a landline. So we all use texting today. We sit there and text between each other, family, friends, all that. And this great technology friend of mine said, hey, I heard that you can text enable a number. So I can't take credit for it. My friends just know I know how to find things and deploy them. So a friend of mine, Enlai Chu, who was eventually bought out by Skype and Microsoft and all that, and owned his own patents in group texting, put me on this journey. And as soon as I found out that I could text enable a regular landline, my design gears started to spin really, really fast. And I went to my crate in the middle of Times Square, and I said, texting is coming. But not the texting you know. Texting is coming to businesses. Imagine taking what an IVR does, an interactive voice response system, basically what you call into and hate, right? We could now take and make more efficient. Imagine being able to text in one word and skip the entire tree. How efficient would that be? How many more customers would feel like they're really taken care of just by simplicity of just making that simple shortcut happen? And over the years, I grew my company, one of my companies, the infrastructure company, because everything to me starts at transport. You have to understand the ecosystem first. And I soon found out the hard way that messaging is unregulated. And coming from voice, voice is highly regulated. You have no idea how much protection you have with your voice telephone number and your voice calls. But in messaging, and I often describe it this way, I landed on the island of Dr. Moreau. Everything I thought I knew, I didn't know about the ecosystem, even though it used the same phone number I've been using for years in voice over IP. I had no idea how different it really was. Fast forward a little bit, through a lot of battles, and a lot of connections. So I have friends at all these big messaging companies that make my companies look like a speck, like literally a speck. But they found a common ground with me, and we soon all became friends because we needed to add a little bit of law to the Wild West, as we called it. And that's when we did something at the FCC. You saw them sitting here earlier. Imagine a whole building of them. Imagine having to sit in front of suits that have no idea about technology. At least the people I knew in the space had somewhat of an idea of technology, but the government regulators had zero understanding. So what had happened is we had a bad player come into the industry. I won't say their name, I'll just say they're a bad player. And what they did is they hijacked all long code, they call it, which is a 10-digit landline number text-enabled. They hijacked all the 800 number transport. They made a deal with the wireless carriers and created a monopoly that nobody even knows about. So all of the rest of the industry was forced to use this one provider because it's unregulated. And the government didn't step in. And we knocked at their door, we wrote ex partes, and eventually we came as a group to the FCC. And I'm talking 15 large companies as competitors facing an issue together. And that really, when we left that building, which is ironic, just to digress, when you go to the FCC, on your first time there, make sure you look good, because that's the picture for the rest of your life on your badge. So when Jeff Pulver went the first time, he was in his 20s. He's a heavy guy now, a little bit heavier, and a lot older. He has his 20-year-old picture on his badge when he walks around. So just a heads up. So we left there, and Jeff turned to me in the Uber back to the airport, and he said, I really want us to start a trade association because this needs to change. This is exactly what happened in voice over IP, which nobody realizes. Voice over IP was challenged the same way text messaging is being challenged today. Controlled, blocked. It's an awful place. So trying to change the Wild West. And that's what MessageComm is all about. So once we came back from that meeting, I reached out to the same folks that I have monthly calls with. I have a lot of monthly calls, you can imagine. And when I did that, we started to understand better what we were trying to accomplish. And that was to really bring the industry side to the table instead of letting the carriers define everything. We all didn't get along with carriers, but this was our opportunity to sit at a round table and discuss things with them. And then we realized as well, we could use this as an educational moment to those who know nothing, that just landed on the island of Dr. Moreau and are seeing little dogs with chicken heads running around, like trying to figure it out, and they have no idea. These TAD hack winners have no idea what they're going to step into. You cannot send out a group message from one number and expect it not to get blocked. when I heard the person in front of the FCC from Texas A&M state, well, we want to use texting to notify emergency services. I wouldn't depend on texting at this point for emergency services. The presidential text didn't hit my phone. Maybe because the carriers don't like me very much some days, maybe not. But what if that was a true emergency? Does that mean that we don't believe in messaging? No, we believe in it. Because when I first entered the space in 2007, they said that texting was dead. Reminds me of rock and roll. They said that at one point about rock and roll, right? So really having the charter in front of us, we went to work. And it was fledgling. We just started this trade association in April. I kept it to the core group that basically controls about 80% of all local and toll-free text enablement in the country. Because if we couldn't come together as a single voice, we weren't going to change anything. But that's when we started. What we do understand is texting should be available to consumers to companies, consumers to businesses, consumers to organizations. It's an efficient way to communicate. We actually call it a green tech, because if you think about it, I've come from voice for a long time. Voice is very complicated. It's very technical, and it's very computing power, resource heavy. So we started to ask people in the educational path, do you support messaging? And this is where we come into, educating the industry too, because, and I had this revelation. I was just on with Jeff with our directors meeting the other day, and I realized that when we talk about omni-channel communications, all we're trying to do is match our lifestyles. We are omni-channel communications societies now. This is how we operate. There's not one person in this room or on the webcast or anyone I've ever spoken to that says, oh, I only use email. I only answer my phone. I don't do text. I don't do email. I don't browse on the web. I don't use WhatsApp. It's a big shock, right? Like, just to realize and sit back for a second that we are actually an omni-channel society, and businesses need to catch up. Social media came into that mix and exposed a lot of personal and private data. Again, a trade association should look at that issue as well. And that's where I'm going to get into some examples of how you can look at technology, match a problem in the industry that needs to be solved, and not just for your own company, but maybe for an entire ecosystem. We already know people prefer texting. The stats have only gone up. When I first started, it was if you sent out a text to someone, they would open it within 90% of people would open that text message within 15 minutes. Email, you're lucky to have a 1% open rate ever. Now, it's 95% of people open a text message in less than 5 minutes. You want to touch a consumer, you want to communicate, you want to interact, try and do that through a voice IVR tree. So what we started with is, let's think about how we're going to approach this. If we're going to educate the community, why don't we talk about the ABCs? And in this case, we already had a D. So you're going to see a D slide because we put that D slide in here just for this event because we knew innovators would be around and be listening to this. So really, when you address key issues, we're addressing the issues of we're a community already. How do we expose that community to both the government and to the wireless operators that control the network on the other side? We're all creating our own applications, but they control the delivery of what we're trying to build within our applications. People didn't understand, like when I was first doing the transport, I actually started to see people start to send picture messaging over our network with the front and back of their credit card, and I was aghast. SMS texting is not a secure channel. Do not send private or personal information. There are so many people in the way that you don't know. And I'll give you a quick overlay. If someone sends a message from an AT&T subscriber to a Verizon subscriber, you would think it would just go from AT&T to Verizon, right? It doesn't work that way. It goes from AT&T to their aggregator, being Cineverse, through three different ways of spam filtration, plus each network has its own spam filtration. Each of those little stops have the ability to be looking at your messaging, and they are looking at your messaging. In fact, that bad player I was talking about earlier with the toll-free, they intentionally look at your messaging and provide it to you as a sales pitch without your consent, which we did change, by the way. Recently, the FCC released an order, and imagine that they dismantled net neutrality, but yet they listened to us and changed the rules around toll-free texting so that that behavior could stop. And that's already a ruling. So when you send from AT&T, it goes to an aggregator. That aggregator, if they don't support that wireless operator, in this case, those two are not supported by the same aggregator, it jumps to another aggregator. From that aggregator, it goes into the network of Verizon and is delivered to you. You never knew that. I'm sure not many people know that. But that's the real ecosystem. And if you think about single points of failure, if you think of security risks, the more eyes on data, the more it creates a security risk. And this is where we saw a lot of opportunity in the design space. And I had this silly idea because people would scrape the texting off of your number because it's not regulated. You have zero rights if you call the FCC and say, somebody stole my texting. They don't care. Well, I shouldn't say they don't care. It's not regulated, so they can't care. How about that? And hopefully we'll change some of that just to put a little bit of law into this Wild West. So Text Protect really started as something simple. I called one of the, backing up, to understand how to design a solution, you have to understand the players in the ecosystem, and you have to understand the flow of the networks. I already knew the flow of the networks. I already knew the choke points, being what they call text messaging enablement registries, where if you text enable your number, it's identified within one of these registries, one of which is Somos, which I sit in their advisory board as their futurist. And net number, which is a local number registry, but they also dealt with toll-free. And what was happening is people were taking the text messaging right off of businesses. And there's a story that we filed in the FCC of one of the credit cards you probably carry in your wallet, that their 800 number was hacked for 2 weeks. And what we know in America, we don't really know that one number is text-enabled and another isn't. We just naturally think that everything's text-enabled because that's our society. We're an omni-channel society. So what we figured out is if I was to design this properly, I needed to incorporate those choke points. So what I had done is I reached out to these registries, one of which is very policy-driven, being Somos. They're an administrator assigned by the government, a legal monopoly, which is okay because they're neutral. They're not there to steal anybody's data or any of that. I reached out to the local number registry, super agile, not assigned as anything from the government, but a really smart set of folks over there. Within 2 weeks of my first iteration of this design, he deployed it. Right through his APIs, the entire ecosystem started to change at that point. And then I said, well, wait, I can't sell this as a product. I want to give it away to the industry because I don't think any commercial entity should make money from this service. I think it should be free to have security on your numbers. And that's where it evolved into an 8-digit alphanumeric PIN that by the end of this quarter will be in beta, and by the first quarter of next year, all consumers and all businesses will have the ability to put that 8-digit PIN themselves, after being validated that they're the authoritative role, to protect from anybody text enabling the number without their authority. And I've recently been on the edge of communications again, so I live in the world of blockchain too. So I happened to design this with blockchain in mind because I needed a transaction that was documented, immutable, that if you had ownership, it would stick no matter what you were attaching to your phone number, because our phone numbers are our virtual social security number nowadays. Everything's tied to them, whether you realize it or not. So in that evolution, I realized, well, if the consumer is only dealing with the registry as opposed to a carrier, doesn't that completely speed up portability? And you're going to hear that from Dean in a little while. He's a friend of mine, Dean Bubley. He's going to talk about blockchain and telecom. I'm living in blockchain and telecom. I'm already filed patents, waiting for them to be awarded, because I think it's a fantastic application of a network. And that's how I look at blockchain. So basically, you're going to be able to port your number from one texting provider to another, and then it'll go into voice and all the different applications. By telling the phone company that you want them to have the business, they tell the registry, you receive some kind of correspondence. It could be a text message, and it says, hey, looks like you want to change your number to this company. You respond, yes, done. The existing process is a paper-driven process. It's called a letter of authorization. You have to put your billing address. You can't spell anything wrong. Don't capitalize anything wrong, or it gets slowed down. That process historically has taken up to 30 to 45 days. So imagine you being able to do this instantly. And the wireless industry did this. You know, they did have instant portability. So when you think about the ABCs of MessageComm, you have to think about the security aspect. That's where Text Protect comes in, and you'll all enjoy it soon enough, and I hope you do. I love creating a child that everybody gets to use. I'm all about community. But we also have to build best practices, and best practices mean I also have friends in the texting industry that allow people to send spam. They make a lot of money, lots and lots of money. But that doesn't do anything but take texting and turn it into email. And who wants that, right? So we need to build best practices. And best practices mean the players, even at the top of the food chain, the bottom of the food chain, wherever you are, you need to adhere to best practices so that you don't become that bad player. I implore people to build a messaging channel. One of the companies, I'm not going to pitch the company, but it is a bot company. And as soon as I was past the network side of texting, I went into how can I apply this into an interactive model. I would say if anyone's looking to design something or add something to their book of services or customer support, add chatbots. Chatbots are going to become probably about $20 billion industry in a couple of years. And to me, that's old hat, right? I've been doing this since 2007. So welcome to that 9-year later track that I had mentioned earlier, but I'm moving on. So enjoy bots. They're fantastic. And I was working on them before that somewhat rich fellow named Mark Zuckerberg decided that bots were a hot thing. I was that guy screaming from that soapbox, that crate in Times Square again. So what we noticed when, just the education from the commercial side, what we noticed when we just started to deploy chatbots, don't start with very complex. Like AI, I always looked at as assisted intelligence. I actually know, I'm blessed enough to know one of the original Stanford team that created AI during a summer program in like 1968. They said then that AI would be as smart as humans in 10 years. I didn't see AI smarter than me in the 70s. Yes, I am that old. A little older than that, but we won't go there. So what we noticed when we gave people simple bots is it became a mouse and a cookie event. And I read that book. I have 4 kids, and a granddaughter, and I've read this quite often, give a mouse a cookie, and they'll ask for a glass of milk. So as simple as solving a simple business problem that's ubiquitous across all businesses, when do you open? When do you close? What are your specials? Think of the early website days. Isn't that what we did? We certainly didn't have e-commerce when websites first came out. It was an evolution. Everything evolves in technology. And this is where the D slide came in, because I really want to speak to the developers out there about do's and don'ts. And the do's and don'ts really come into, don't assume you know what an ecosystem does, and design your solution that will fail and fall flat in its face before it even moves one step forward. Could be the best idea ever, but if you don't know what's in that mayhem of an ecosystem, get to know it quick and design around that. The other thing is find a trade association, no matter if it's in messaging, if it's the Linux Foundation, if it's GSMA, there's like a whole bunch of trade associations. And what I learned by not being politically active is that you hit a glass ceiling of growth. If you don't have that political side and you don't have that involvement, you become a bystander. You do not set the rules. You have to live by the rules set. So again, I implore you to join a trade association. We're lucky enough to have some really superstar people in there that help each other. So it's like a friend of mine, David Singer, about a decade ago, used this expression. I'll always give him credit. He said, "We're not competition, Noah. We're cooperation." And that really hit me hard. And I used that in a speech at Somos recently. And who walked up to me after 10 years, but the same person who told me that statement. I hadn't seen him in like 10 years. So it's impactful that not only do you have to understand the ecosystem, think ahead, think of the security, think of what bad guys would do with your tech. If you don't think what bad guys would do with your tech, you're making a big mistake. The do's: join trade associations, surround yourself with people in the ecosystem that are successful and failed. I think all great success starts with failure. I know it's like a weird thing to say, but it's worked for me. Join the community. And if there is no community, create the community. I always joke about being a director of this trade association because I have enough occupations already. Most people get a second job at McDonald's or a third job. I happen to take on careers that are siloed, and I found the value was incredibly high, and it's incredibly challenging to me personally. And I say to the same group that has surrounded me, that's now grown to 20-something companies in a few months, after I just started to open the door this last month, they're all scrambling in, right? Because they want to be part of it. But just look at everything you do as a journey. And we describe that in the messaging channel. Understand that you have to learn about everything from those who have either succeeded, failed, or both. You need to understand what you're trying to accomplish with your design, right? If it's surrounding messaging, are you looking for engagement? Is this an outbound solution? Understand the risks and rewards. You send too many outbound messages, you're going to get fined by the FCC in a big, big, big way. I've seen billions of dollars in fines by now. This is more of a reason to join the Messaging Association, but I'm not going to really stick to the slide. I'm just going to say, again, I implore you to join an association that aligns with your goals and your designs. Add the people that you need to it. Don't be afraid to ask for people to be your mentors. And if there's any questions, I'll open it up for questions. Anyone? This sounds like a team call in one of my companies. Crickets. Okay, great. that makes my speech very short and brief, and hopefully everybody enjoyed it. Thank you very much.